Exit 6b. My cheating wife is a charmer, a man snake charmer. Today's entitled Women Search for Attention and Validation leads them onto Highway 304, the cheater's highway. In Exit 6, I enlightened you with the story between my wife's lover and how I felt about the situation. Today, I will attempt to focus, if I can, on my wife's part in our little story. The business where my wife works hired a young man that had a favorite pastime. Seduction of married women was his favorite pastime. After I hired a PI to investigate, I learned that he had a long line of success with seducing married women in at least 3 cities before he came to ours. It seems that he kept himself in great physical shape as a tool in his seduction toolbox. Now, those huge biceps were designer muscle, not strong work muscles. Muscles for show, not for lifting heavy objects. Built by lots of reps, not heavy lifting. But according to my sources, he boasted of another tool of more than average design. The hunt and seduction of attractive married women fueled his ego, and the humiliation he cast upon the husbands made him feel powerful and untouchable. Besides humiliating the husband, he did enjoy having a steady stream of willingly sexual partners that he never had to commit to. Love them and leave them. He starts with a couple of single women at each office so they would talk around the office gossip mill about his reputation as a lover. That made it easy to move on to the first married woman. He preferred women married more than 10 years older. Women that were less likely to leave their husbands because of their children's welfare. My wife met those requirements. As I watched my wife change over the beginnings of his employment, I heard about his new hire. How nice he was. How attractive he was. How all the women in the office lusted after him except her. Then after the second month, I didn't hear about him anymore. Red flag. New clothes in the closet. New clothes that were less conservative. Red flag. Late from work for no reasons. Red flag. Stopping for drinks with the gang. Big red flag. Smelling of the same man's cologne. Huge red flag. I paid my little brother to follow her from the time she got off work until she parked in our driveway. I needed to be home with our girls. Pictures and video showed that she was not going to pass the husband test, so I decided to spend the money on a real private eye. She ignored me, and was less attentive to our teenage daughters. I could not abide by that. You know what I did at his apartment, so that's all the backstory for today. After my first encounter with Johnson, my middle brother reported that my wife went to the emergency room with Johnson. She drove him back to his apartment to get some clothes. Johnson went to an extended stay motel, while my brother followed my wife back to our house. The house was empty because my youngest brother had taken the girls to stay with his family. The cameras I installed for my girls showed her rushing through the house before finally throwing herself on the bed around 4 am. At 8 am, she called into the office for a personal day. Her boss wasn't happy about it. Now he had 2 employees calling in on the same day. That's going to stir up the office gossip pool. It looked like she spent the day getting ready for the husband. She was physically trying to prepare for a physical beating that was coming. She had taken Johnson to the hospital, and was afraid that she was next for a hospital visit. I picked the girls up from school early. We went to the mall food court where I explained that their mother had a lover, and I had beaten him last night so I would probably be arrested. My unbelieving daughters changed the tune when I showed them the pictures that the PI took of their mother naked in someone else's bed. Running toward the camera holding a blanket in front of her. I took the girls home, and went back to the job site where the police would arrest me for assault. We have security cameras inside our house to watch our pets for some reason, so I have watched the video of my daughters fighting with their mother a dozen times. My wrath was nothing like the wrath of a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old daughters screaming at the 304 mother. At this point, I'm not sure how my wife is going to bridge the gap between them. Especially without me in the house. I have been the moderator of disputes in our household. Let's see how much the wife likes the disrespect heaped upon her. Like she disrespected me. Once I was out of jail, I tune in through the security cameras to watch my wife. She's spending a lot of time on her phone. The girls walk through the cameras as they ignore their mother. That night, I dressed in black hoodie, my brother and I drove over to my house. He held his hand over the garage security camera while I unlocked the side door to our garage. I entered the garage where I opened the hood on the wife's car, and disconnected a fuel injector, and let the air out of the driver's rear tire. The next morning, I answered my phone to a scared wife. My car isn't running right. The check engine light is on, and the low tire light's on too. I smiled to myself. Not my problem. Sucks to be you. I disconnected the call. It's not that I wanted my girls to be stranded, but I did want the wife to be inconvenienced. The next evening, I wanted as my daughters fought with their mother as she tried to go see her lover. I called his concerned neighbor that a domestic dispute was going on at her address. Watching my wife try to talk to the police officer when my eldest daughter is screaming that her mother abused her as she tried to protect the younger sister. The officer called Child Protective Service to help mediate. My daughters were taken to my younger brother's house for their protection until an investigation could be conducted. Instead of trying to fix this situation, my wife went to see Johnson at the motel. That's why I went to spook him the next day. I assumed that the wife persuaded Johnson to return to his apartment. I think the fact that I startled him in the motel parking lot made him feel unsafe there. With no daughters at home, my wife lived like a single woman. Nights out with her friends where she met men other than Johnson. Her transformation was nearing completion, as Johnson had several women on the side, and, now, my wife had several men. My brother got some interesting videos of her adventures as he followed her those nights. On the good side, she didn't bring anyone back to my house. Apparently, after testing what she thought was the deluxe package, that she needed more samples. With video and PI photographs in hand, I met with a divorce attorney, and made plans to have her served as soon as possible. With the interest of Child Protection Services involved, and the fact that the children were staying with their uncle, showed my wife in a bad light. I explained that since I had charges against me for assault, I felt it better for the girls to stay with my younger brother. He agreed. Not knowing if it was fear of me, or the excitement of living the single life, that she next made no contact me with phone or text. I came and went from the house while she was at work to get anything that I might need. I didn't want to buy any clothes or toiletries. I did eat a few meals at home, and left the dirty dishes in the kitchen sink. I knew that would piss her off. Without me there, the outside of the house was out of control. The front grass was at least a foot tall. As a concerned neighbor, I called city code enforcement. They left a citation attached to the front door with a fine of $50, and a 3-day deadline to cut the lawn. My wife had never cut the grass in her life. It should be fun to watch when it happens. If the grass gets much taller, she won't be able to cut it with the push mower. My wife's bestie called me and asked me if I could come over and do maintenance on the outside of the house. I replied, have her get one of her boyfriends to do it. She can trade some sex for it. Trim some grass, to get some ash. I laughed as I disconnected the call. It seemed that Johnson is not husbandly duty type of man, only a good time man. The second night that Johnson was back in his apartment, I waited in the parking lot as my wife went into his apartment. I waited to confront her because I had copies of the divorce papers. I wanted the satisfaction of giving them to her as she left his apartment. I found humor as I looked around the complex, and I secretly shot a series of paintballs onto the security cameras. In case things go bad when I confront her, I want my voice recorder to be the only evidence. It was a cool night and I stood beside my car drinking coffee when I see Johnson leaving his apartment. I pulled up my hood over my head, and swooped in behind Johnson as he stepped off the curb. I added my shove to his back and he went down face first onto the asphalt pavement. His face bleeding, I turned him face up and dropped my right knee into his bread box, and went to strangle Johnson. He begged for his life, placing all the blame on my dear wife. How she pursued him, how she was fascinated with little Johnson. I explained to him that I would let him live, but if the cops show up again, I would do something drastic to him. It was obvious to me that the most precious thing in his life was his thing. It was his identity. My wife finally called me the next morning around 10, after she was served at work. For the first time, she acknowledged that she thought I had beat him up again, and I would never see my girls again when I get out of jail for assault. I laughed at her. What makes you think that you'll have the girls? I disconnected the call because the police were pulling up to the job site. My brother alibied me to the police since I stayed with him. I gave the officers a list of women that Johnson had relations with, so the police could have more suspects than me. I didn't go after her job because I didn't want to pay alimony. On paper, she made more than I do. I kept my assets tied up in my business. Contractors pay me with checks, while a lot of individuals like my cash discount. A couple weeks later, on my birthday, my brothers, daughters, and employees shared my birthday dinner at Senor Burritos. It was wonderful. I laughed and enjoyed their company. While I enjoyed my birthday dinner, at a nightclub downtown, Johnson was followed into the men's room and robbed and assaulted at the urinal. Someone found him bleeding out on the dirty floor with Little Johnson unattached from Big Johnson. He must have really pissed someone off. It was recorded that my wife rode to the hospital with Johnson. I wasn't surprised when I was arrested the next day. Why is it that I'm always the suspect when something happens to the guy that boinking a lot of married women? Witnesses and video from Senor Burrito cleared me as a suspect. It seems that the restaurant has great security cameras since it's in a high-crime area. As for Johnson, the doctors reattached Lil Johnson, and I wonder how Johnson feels about it missing a chunk. It was his identity for so long. I wonder how fascinated my wife will be with him after he heals in a few months. If it even works at all. As for the original assault charge, the testimony of my private investigator swayed the judge that I had a moment of temporary insanity when I witnessed my wife's infidelity. Since it was my first offense, I was sentenced to 90 days of jail time and reimbursed Johnson for medical expenses incurred that night. Since I was a business owner, I was to serve my jail time on weekends. I report to the jail Friday before 6 p.m., and I am released on Monday morning at 6 a.m. Our divorce is still months away, but I wanted to give her something that would last a lifetime. I put the word out that I wanted to find someone with the STD to give to my wife. He had to be good looking, and have no qualms about giving the STD to my wife. One of my workers has a cousin that fit the bill. It seems that he has incurable herpes. Both of my brothers sit with me in the dark nightclub watching as the cousin slow dances with my wife. 3 beers later, I smile as they walk out the door together. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.